Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror TV series named Creepshow Season 3. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story, titled Mums, begins with a shot of an isolated farmhouse sitting beside a country lane. The boy named Jack spends his days feeding pigs and doing family chores, living a seemingly carefree existence. However, his father is a violent man, spending his days drinking, causing trouble, and beating his wife. One day, while the father was out, Jack's mother shared with him that his great-grandmother would turn 100 that summer. She expressed her wish to visit the grandmother together with Jack. Jack was elated, but little did he know this was but a well-intended lie. His mother, despite being battered by her husband daily, strived to create the illusion of a harmonious home for her son. However, she could bear it no longer. She wanted to take her son and leave, to escape the confines of their rural life and her abusive husband. But the father, having sensed her change in behavior, stood in her way with two of his friends. To punish his disobedient wife, he dragged her away forcefully. All the mother could do was to reassure her frail son not to resist. Following his father's request, his friend Beth took good care of Jack. His mother was forced into a car. Beth consoled Jack, assuring him that his mother would be all right. But this farewell would be forever between mother and son. Beth said that his mother was an adult. She knew how to protect herself. Jack harbored resentment towards his father, but Beth never stopped speaking well of him. Deep into the night, the father and his close friend were acting suspiciously. It turned out that the brutal father had actually killed his wife. Meanwhile, Jack was still anxiously waiting for news of his mother. Beth was saddened by the mother's death. After all, they had spent many years together and had become inseparable friends. However, she still concealed this secret for the father. Jack had no choice but to pack up his mother's belongings alone. His mother had taken a photo of her and Jack, even when she was fleeing. Tucked within the photo was a packet of seeds. Picking up the seeds, Jack looked up and saw his mother's contorted face, but it was all just a nightmare. It was the neighbor Beth who arrived to offer comforting words, making Jack feel warmly embraced. After Jack fell asleep, his father and his close friend sneakily moved the body to the backyard. It was the garden his mother had loved to tend while she was alive, and the poor mother eventually became the fertilizer for her beloved flowers. In the blink of an eye, it was morning. His father returned home, covered in dirt. Jack instantly realized what had happened. With tears welling up in his eyes, he dared not ask about his mother's whereabouts. The father said that his mother was a drunkard and drug addict. She had left Jack long ago to live her own carefree life. He also told Jack not to suspect him of being the murderer. The close friends standing in front of him and Beth were both accomplices. Jack came to his mother's garden carrying seeds, but these seeds were unusually sharp, and they cut Jack, causing him to bleed profusely. Sorrowfully, Jack planted the seeds. His father, in reality, had formed a terrorist organization with his pals and Beth. They spent their days scheming about dividing the country and establishing their own faction. After a few beers, they felt as though they owned all of America. It turns out, his motivation for killing the mother and keeping Jack was to groom his son into a terrorist. As the night approached, Jack had fallen into a deep sleep. The seeds in the yard had quietly begun to sprout and eventually bloomed into dazzling flowers. The next morning, Jack was amazed to see the seeds left by his mother had such magic. The flower stems were full of thorns. Jack gripped one of the thorns, blood trickling down his hand and seeping into the soil, providing nourishment. One night, Jack overheard through the window that his father and his pals were discussing plans to rob the tax bureau. It all started to make sense. His mother had fled with him because she had learned about their plan. Beth, who was as close as a sister to his mother, had betrayed her despite knowing his father was a murderer. Jack found it hard to accept that shortly after his mother's death, Beth had sided with his father. It was clear she had long wanted to eliminate the mother and take her place. From the backyard, there came a sudden squeal of a piglet. It turns out the plants weren't just bloodsuckers, and they desired flesh as well. Jack struggled to rescue the piglet. Once deprived of food, the plant surprisingly wound around Jack's arm. Next, the mother's corpse emerged from the soil. She greedily drained her son's fresh blood. After her meal and drink, she held Jack close and kissed him, murmuring something in his ear. Jack was terrified. He rushed inside to find Beth, seeking help. Beth was puzzled, so she followed Jack to the backyard, but all they saw were vibrant flowers. Unexpectedly, Jack picked up a spade and swung it at Beth. Having dealt with Beth, it was now his father's turn. Jack used the same ploy, claiming to have seen something strange in the backyard. He tricked his father into the garden. Just then, Mother rose from the ground again, her tendrils starting to bind the father. The once arrogant father was immobilized and bit by Mother and dragged into the mud for a slow, savory feast. In the end, Jack duped Father's close friend over the phone, and the killing spree continued until sunrise. After that, 4 lives had transformed into 4 splendid flowers. Jack sped down the avenue with the blood-sucking flowers, intending to fulfill his mother's last wish, to take her back to their hometown and see her great-grandmother, who was nearing her 100th birthday. The second story, titled Queen Bee, begins with 3 close friends, Trinice, Carlos, and Deborah, who shared a common passion. They were all profoundly enamored with a pop singer named Regina. It was rumored that Regina was 9 months pregnant and preparing for childbirth. Coincidentally, Deborah's mother was a nurse at the local hospital. Being very considerate, she left her wallet so the trio could go out to eat. As it turned out, pop star Regina was due to give birth that very night. Wary of any disturbance, she had exclusively reserved the entire 4th floor of the hospital, bringing her own team of doctors and staff. This was why Deborah's mother had suddenly taken leave. Upon hearing that their idol was in the hospital, Trinice and Carlos were extremely excited and insisted on visiting the hospital to catch a glimpse of the superstar's baby. Deborah, bearing her mother's pass, led the way. As they made their way, the trio began discussing how Regina was extremely private. Paparazzi had never managed to capture her boyfriend, but mysteriously she had become pregnant. Like a queen, Regina had never spoken of love or needed a man. She was indeed the modern idol for many women. After much discussion, the trio finally made it into the hospital. Deborah expressed concern, wondering whether they should disturb the pop star who valued her privacy. Unfazed, Trinice used the pass to open the back door. To their surprise, the medical team was in the process of taking Regina to the delivery room. This was the closest they had ever been to their idol, and they were over the moon. However, the security downstairs spotted their sneaky entrance and tried to expel them. At that moment, they were merely a step away from their idol. There was no way they could give up easily. They managed to overpower the security guard, who tumbled down the stairs and lay motionless. Just for the sake of meeting a celebrity, they had caused serious harm. Nevertheless, these fanatics didn't care in the slightest. The entire floor had been rented out, so there was not a soul in sight nor a single light on. A healthcare worker was wheeling a corpse right past them. Trinice inadvertently made a noise and thought he'd been exposed, yet to his surprise, the healthcare worker seemed not to hear anything. As he turned around, Trinice found the worker's eyes were as bright as light bulbs. In order to meet their idol, the 3 decided to search further. Peering through the glass window, they saw a few monstrous doctors administering an anesthetic to Regina. The next moment, Regina's body underwent a terrifying transformation. 2 long claws extended from her belly. In the blink of an eye, Regina had turned into a giant queen bee, belly hanging down as she clung to the wall. The trio outside the room wet their pants in fright. The reckless Carlos even took out his camera, but the flash caught the queen's attention. There was no escaping now. The queen emitted a piercing scream, causing Carlos's and Deborah's eyes to turn as bright as bulbs, making them become the queen's slaves. Fortunately, Trinice, who was wearing headphones, dodged a bullet. It turned out that the queen's weapon was her piercing scream, which enabled her to make everyone bow down to her. Trinice quickly stuffed cotton into Deborah's ears, and she snapped back to reality. But Carlos was not so lucky. He walked up to the queen, willingly offered up his brain for her to feast on. The sight of bloodshed instantly cured the stupidity of the 2 girls, causing them to run for their shitty lives. However, this floor was swarming with the queen's minions, who promptly locked down the exit. Seizing Deborah by her hair, they began marching towards the delivery room. Trinice bravely fought back to rescue Deborah, with their only hope for escape being the elevator. Unfortunately, 2 of the queen's slaves stood guard by the elevator, leaving no room for escape. The girls were left with no choice but to fight back for their survival. Deborah quickly picked up a syringe, blinded 1 minion with it, and used a defibrillator to subdue the other. Finally, after dealing with all of the queen's underlings, Deborah and Trinice sighed in relief. Trinice revealed a smartphone that belonged to Carlos, containing pictures revealing the queen's true monstrous form. Determined to expose the queen, Trinice planned to show everyone that the queen was a monster. Upon hearing this, Deborah, who had tickets to her next concert, was aghast. She rebuked Trinice for attempting to destroy the Queen's career over a few lives she had consumed, and accused Trinice of being a fake fan and unexpectedly removed her own earplugs. Now, the whole hospital was transformed into the Queen's nest. Trinice was trapped, pleading with Deborah to come to her senses. Yet Deborah confessed her disappointment in Trinice for being a naysayer. The Queen promised Deborah a place of honor at her side, even allowing her to take care of her baby. As Deborah revealed the Queen's baby, with its repulsive, squirming tail, she insisted that it was adorable. The newborn needed a fresh meal, and with a horrifying scream, Trinice ended up as food for the Queen's offspring. The third story, titled Skeletons in the Closet, begins with Hollywood's largest movie museum, displaying a variety of film props like the facehugger from Alien, the mask from Halloween, Freddy's razor glove from Nightmare on Elm Street, the captain's throne from Star Wars, and the old woman's skull from Psycho. The owner of this museum, a beardy man named Beardy, inherited these valuable film props from his father. Beardy often pulls out 2 golden tickets from the chocolate factory, handing them to the visiting guests, reminding them to catch the premiere of new movies. Beardy has a girlfriend, Babe. The pair manage this museum together, making a living by exhibiting these props. Beardy once told Babe about his father's arch-rival, a man named Raymond, both big collectors competing to bid on film props. It's a shame that his father passed away before witnessing Raymond's defeat. In the deep of night, the museum welcomed a peculiar new visitor. Babe enthusiastically introduced a chainsaw displayed on the counter to him. She said this is the very model used by the protagonist in a horror movie. The visitor chuckled lightly, dismissing the chainsaw as trivial. He held in his hand the original chainsaw from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a collector's item much coveted. Beardy, expressing interest in purchasing it, then asked his girlfriend to showcase the boots from the film 007 in the hope of a potential exchange. However, he found it didn't catch the visitor's fancy. As it turns out, this visitor was none other than Raymond, their formidable rival from the past. Beardy then unveiled a curtain in the museum, behind which were hidden 5 skulls. These were the most valuable items in the museum. Legend has it that some films used real skulls as props for the sake of authenticity. These props were referred to as holy items by collectors. The skull from Indiana Jones, for instance, and the original skull used in the Creepshow had always captivated him. But the one that left him truly astounded was the basement zombie from Dawn of the Dead. Raymond was simply spellbound, but then he changed the subject, insisting that Beardy sell him one of the skulls. Beardy was reluctant, but Raymond came prepared this time. As it happened, this skull was not a prop but a real-life accident. The film Dawn of the Dead had caused quite a controversy. After the movie was finished, the production crew reburied the bones. However, just several days ago, the bones were stolen. Apparently, Beardy, being too obsessed with movie props, had exhumed the grave and moved the skull to his own museum. Watching Raymond about to call the police, Beardy could only fall on his knees and plead for mercy. Raymond was relentlessly intimidating, even spouting insults towards Babe. In her anger, Babe promptly used her boot to knock Raymond senseless. In fear of being sent to imprisonment, Beardy had Babe retrieve the hook from Night of the Living Dead and the cutter from Breaking Bad. Together, they carried the body to a warehouse, skinned it, removed the flesh, and then disposed of the remains in a chemical solution. Eventually, they turned Raymond's body into a skeleton. In this way, the unfortunate Raymond didn't benefit from his blackmail, and for the rest of his life, he had to work for his enemy's son. Babe was still upset about Beardy digging graves. Pointing at an unnamed skeleton, she demanded its origin. Beardy claimed that the skeleton was his own father. This drove Babe to even more anger. She called him a freak, for he had even dug up his own father. Beardy said it was his father's dying wish. Even in death, he wanted to protect his lifelong collection. But Babe still found it unacceptable. She decided to take a bath first, to ponder whether to break up with her boyfriend. Little did she know the resentment of Raymond hadn't dissipated. Even after turning into a skeleton, he was determined to drag the couple down to hell with him. Raymond's skeleton climbed off the stage. Meanwhile, Babe was undressing, and the skeleton brandished a dagger and lunged at Babe in the bathroom. This sequence, both in terms of music and editing, was a tribute to the film Psycho. There wasn't a single bloody scene, yet it still managed to send chills down everyone's spine. The belated arrival of Beardy discovered Babe's lifeless body, but before he could mourn, the skeleton was already brandishing an axe at him. The skeleton hacked away at the bathroom door in a scene that was a tribute to the film, The Shining. Beardy fought back with the lid of a water tank and ran towards the exhibition hall. The skeleton pursued relentlessly, wielding the chainsaw in a scene that was likely a tribute to The Mummy. Just when Beardy was in dire peril, his father stepped forward in the nick of time. The two fierce rivals in life were locked in a final showdown even after death. Yet, the father prevailed, beheading Raymond's skeleton with one swift stroke. The father and son finally claimed victory. With the addition of a few skeletons, the museum's business boomed day by day. The knife in the father's hand was replaced with a chainsaw from the Evil Dead series. The visitors bluntly declared these as rubbish, except for the skeleton from the Creepshow. Beardy enthusiastically introduced a new exhibit, his girlfriend Babe. He named this piece the Mona Lisa. All the exhibits here came to life at night. As long as the exhibits were still here, the magic of the movies would never fade. In the end, the skeleton even took a group photo with everyone. The fourth story, titled Familiar, begins with Jack and his wife getting totally plastered. They walked hand in hand to a fortune-telling shop by the road. It was said that the medium here was effective. He could predict your past and future. The medium kept staring at Jack, making him feel uneasy. The medium first read Jack's wife's palm and declared she was an artist, and more specifically, a sculptor. This surprised her immensely. As the medium spoke, he covertly handed Jack a note under the table, insinuating there was something sinister trailing Jack. Terrified, Jack turned to look, but there was nothing behind him. His wife interrupted his wild thoughts, praising the accuracy of the medium's predictions. Jack wanted to clarify what the medium meant by sinister entity, but remembering the note slipped to him secretly, it was clear that the medium didn't want his wife to know. He hastily paid and left with his wife. Even when they got home, Jack couldn't stop thinking. Bad omens started to occur, like the bedroom door suddenly opening. It seemed like he was just scaring himself. After his wife fell asleep, Jack took out the note from the medium, puzzling over what this sinister entity following him could be. Suddenly, a ghostly figure flashed before him, and he bolted upright in fright, realizing it was just a nightmare. Jack was a lawyer, successful at a young age. Occasionally, to earn money, he'd play the role of a shyster, going against his conscience to secure benefits for his clients. One day, after bidding a client farewell, strange things began happening in his office. First, the printer automatically started working, spitting out a blank sheet. Then, the chair behind him defied gravity and stacked itself. Jack was dumbstruck. Scared, Jack hid in the restroom, texting his wife that he felt followed by something sinister. Suddenly, the lights in the restroom went out, and he was scared stiff. The ghost appeared again to flex its monstrous figure, growling and scratching at the door, and making terrifying roars behind him. Late that night, Jack showed his wife the note the medium had given him. He had a suspicion about the medium. Ever since he had his fortune told, strange events began to occur one after another. His wife, however, found this quite thrilling. After all, she had never encountered a ghost before. Clearly, she didn't believe him. In an attempt to keep Jack's mind off his wild imaginings, she crafted a little sheep figurine for him. Looking at the figurine, Jack fell into deep thought. After saying goodbye to his wife, he returned to the fortune-telling shop. If the medium could see the sinister presence following him, then he must have a way to deal with it. On the table was an ancient book, recording a type of old mythical creature known as a demon pet. It was said that these pets would seek out human hosts, stop at nothing to get close to them, and some would even kill a close friend of the host, impersonate them, and approach the host. The medium told Jack that he had incurred the wrath of a demon pet. The medium handed Jack a necklace and instructed him to draw a circle on the ground when he got home, place the necklace in the circle as bait, and then set a trap using a magical box. Once the box captured the demon pet, he should sink it to the bottom of a lake to drown the creature. This was the only way he could completely rid himself of the monster. With no choice, Jack decided to follow the instructions. Late at night, Jack finally saw some movement in the trap, but the sound coming from within the box was that of a pet dog. Jack thought he'd nabbed the wrong prey. He hastily opened the box, only to be startled by the demon pet lurking inside. Jack's first hunt had ended in a trick. He had forgotten that this creature could imitate the sounds of humans and animals. The constant torment over days had muddled Jack's thinking. The books mentioned that demon pets would disguise themselves as their host's friend to get closer to them. The next morning, Jack prepared another trap. This time, the bait was a lamb made by his wife. To ensure no mistakes were made, he attached a leash to the pet dog and started a camera. He kept a close watch on the trap. Overcome by drowsiness, Jack succumbed to sleep. Just then, his wife's cries were coming from inside the box. She was banging against it, calling out to Jack for help. In a rush, Jack pulled out the recording he had made earlier. However, the video was corrupted. The questioning from inside the box persisted. He tried calling his wife's phone, but there was no answer. Learning from last night's lesson, Jack started to suspect that the creature in the box might be the demon pet disguised as his wife. She continued her desperate pleas from inside the box, but Jack ignored it. Following the instructions, he moved the box to the lakeside. With the sound of the rushing water, his wife's cries became weaker until there was no more sound. Jack was overjoyed. He had finally managed to free himself from the demon's torment. But when he returned home, intending to share the good news with his wife, he saw on the table the little lamb which had been used as bait. It turns out the demon pet hadn't sunk to the bottom of the lake. Instead, it had fished out his wife's body. As the books had written, the demon pet would stop at nothing to kill the close friends of its host and then take over their bodies. Jack had only served to provide the demon pet with a perfect vessel. Now, it had taken possession of his wife's body, and henceforth, it would continue to haunt Jack forever. The fifth story, titled The Last Subaraya, begins with a shot of a mystery box containing the fabled last painting of Subaraya, a famous horror master from Japan. He is a well-known artist more than 100 years ago, was adept at creating all sorts of chilling monsters and ghouls. The mystery box was found in a monastery at the foot of a mountain. Apart from the deceased Subaraya, no one knows what the artwork inside the box looks like. Such a rare treasure drives collectors mad with desire. One such collector is a man named Wade, who is accompanied by a well-known painter named Gisa, who is also his girlfriend. After some haggling, the wealthy Wade managed to buy the mystery box from Subaraya's grandson for several million US dollars. That evening, Wade held an unboxing ceremony in his lavish mansion. Guests arrived in their finest attire, eager to catch a glimpse of the rare treasure. Finally, the curtain was drawn to reveal the master's work, a painting of a grotesque creature. The creature fascinated everyone, as if it were the ultimate collision of passion and nightmare. Wade stopped the approaching guests and murmured that no one has ever seen this work before, and no one ever will again. With these words, Wade shockingly pulled out a lighter. In a matter of moments, the painting was reduced to ashes, to the stunned and despairing gazes of the crowd. Everyone called Wade a madman, but he felt an unprecedented satisfaction. After that, Wade sent away his devastated and infuriated guests. Gisa took out her brush. She intended to restore the creature in the painting as much as possible through Wade's description. Having been with Wade for so long, Gisa had witnessed such scenes countless times. Since childhood, she understood that she had to work harder than her brothers to gain their parents' attention. Wade couldn't empathize with this, being the only son in his family who had enjoyed a life of privilege since birth. He got whatever he desired. Gradually, however, money no longer brought him satisfaction, until one day he haggled mercilessly with a father selling an antique vase. Because of this, the father missed the opportunity to provide his daughter with a heart transplant. Looking at the father's despairing eyes, Wade experienced a thrill like never before. From then on, he began to spend money on rare treasures, only to destroy them in front of admirers. Inflicting pain and despair on others became his only source of pleasures. Gisa painted according to his descriptions and perfectly replicated the monster from the original painting. Oddly enough, after that night, Wade caught sight of the painting on the wall. The monster in it seemed to have widened its eyes, as if waiting for Wade's comeuppance. Even the statue nearby had taken on a demonic form. On the floor lay Gisa's restored painting. The monster in it suddenly opened its mouth wide. Wade was startled. He thought maybe he was disoriented from the alcohol. In a hurry, Wade splashed water on his face to sober up, only to see a reflection of a demon in the mirror. He stepped back in fright and desperately sought Gisa's help. But Gisa claimed she saw nothing. She was lying in bed, engrossed in reading a biography of Subaraya. Gisa speculated that if the man was still alive, he might have become friends with Wade because they shared the same personalities. They were both detestable and disrespectful, filled with contempt for humanity. Wade lifted the blanket. Instead of Gisa, there was clearly the monster from the painting. The real Gisa was standing outside the door, watching the hysterical Wade. She had had enough of his arrogance, which made him paranoid. Gisa packed her things and moved out of Wade's house. She refused to continue being an accomplice to such a scoundrel's wickedness. After Gisa left, the monster in the painting began to haunt like persistent shadows. Monster lurked outside the door, inside the wardrobe, everywhere. Scared out of his wits, Wade could only seek refuge in a museum for the night. But to his horror, the monster continued to tail him. In a rush, Wade drew out a weapon he carried and dealt the monster a deadly blow. The monster vanished suddenly, leaving behind splatters of blood on the weapon. It seemed that the monster was not invincible. It could be hurt. It could bleed. So Wade hurriedly returned to his mansion. He armed himself with a samurai sword and a shotgun, initiating a life-or-death duel with the monster. Before long, the monster was defeated by his powerful weapons. Wade pinned it to a glass window with a long spear. Wade cursed at the weak creature before him, planning to turn it into a specimen for people to appreciate. However, in the blink of an eye, the hideous corpse morphed into a human form. It was clearly the late painter Subaraya, who had been dead for a century. Subaraya, barely holding on to life, said that he had been arrogant and dismissive of humanity during his life. This blasphemy against humanity had denied him peace in death, his soul trapped between the realms of the living and the dead, eventually transforming him into a monster sealed within his artwork. He thanked Wade for breaking his curse and suggested that it would now be Wade's turn to take his place. After that, Subaraya turned to ashes. Wade could never accept to become a monster trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. In the end, he used the spear to end his own life. The police took away Wade's body from the scene, concluding that the wealthy man took his own life in a drunken stupor. Little did they know, Wade's spirit had already imprinted itself onto the glass wall, which would become the next sought-after collectible for the wealthy. It would be auctioned off, lying in wait for the next arrogant individual who disregards humanity to unleash their own insanity. The sixth story, titled "Okay, I'll Bite," begins in a federal prison. The prisoner, Elmer, spends his days feeding a large spider that lives behind the brick wall. This is Elmer's secret and his only source of joy during his imprisonment. Elmer is an upright and kind pharmacist. A year ago, unable to bear the sight of his mother suffering from cancer, he carried out euthanasia on her. For this act, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Elmer's days in prison were harsh. With his pharmaceutical knowledge, the officer Bunk forced him to concoct drugs for them to profit from. The ingredients for the drugs were sourced from the prison doctor, but the doctor hadn't shown up for work in a long time. But Bunk didn't care about this. Any sign of disobedience from Elmer was met with a brutal beating. After Bunk left, Elmer cautiously picked up the few scattered glass jars. Inside were some venomous spiders that Elmer had collected during his outdoor time. The officer, Willis, was a good man. He never made things difficult for Elmer, but also didn't dare to cross Bunk. Elmer told Willis that the ancient Egyptians revered spiders, deeply believing that they understood the secret to eternal life. Consequently, he named one of the spiders Min, after the ancient Egyptian god of fertility. Elmer was convinced that by studying these spiders closely, he could discover the path to immortality. Willis brought a letter. The letter was from one of Elmer's fans who knew about his obsession with ancient Egyptian mythology. The fan had managed to procure some peculiar hieroglyphics from a museum, hoping they might aid Elmer in his research. Elmer started to work tirelessly day and night, trying to translate these indecipherable ancient texts. The script seemed to depict an ancient reincarnation ceremony. As it turned late into the night, Elmer quietly pulled out a bag filled with the small insects he'd caught. He fed these insects to the spiders, including the large one behind the wall, which he named Sekhmet, after the ancient Egyptian goddess. He remembered how a year ago, his mother had been immobilized by cancer, unable to speak or move. He knew she was in terrible pain, so he had administered a dose of poison to her, watching as she closed her eyes forever. The day to deliver the drugs came in the blink of an eye. Obviously, Elmer had no desire to synthesize drugs for Bunk, so he sent 2 cellmates to teach Elmer a lesson. They brutally broke Elmer's fingers. Clearly, this punishment wasn't enough. One cellmate opened a glass jar and killed Elmer's beloved spider right in front of him. That was Elmer's only solace. However, seizing an opportunity, one spider jumped onto the cellmate's face, viciously biting his eye. Bunk twisted the story, falsely accusing Elmer of letting a poisonous creature injure his cellmate, while demanding Elmer to produce drugs. Elmer was helpless against the accusations. The false charges and brutal beatings made Elmer's life a living hell. Only Willis knew of his innocence, but he was powerless. He could only take Elmer to the medical center to get his wounds dressed. The warden decided to transfer Elmer to the terrifying A-block prison, filled with bloodthirsty convicts, announcing a pest extermination in Elmer's cell. This was pushing Elmer to a dead end. Unable to bear any longer, Elmer finally decided to fight back for his own sake. He then drew totems all over the ground, offering his body as a sacrifice to the spider god to transform his soul and begin the path of redemption. Accompanied by chants, a response finally came from the dark, deep hole. The giant spider he had been nurturing revealed its true form. Several hours later, under the cover of night, Bunk showed up with his bald head and decided to teach the disobedient Elmer a lesson. He wanted Elmer to understand the consequences of defying his orders. He unlocked the cell door only to find that Elmer was nowhere to be found. All that was left were clothes on the empty floor and a series of strange symbols. Bunk turned around cursing when suddenly his hands got stuck in strands of spiderweb. Only then did he notice the enormous spiderweb stretching across the ceiling. From the depths of the dark, a giant spider was slowly approaching. Astonishingly, the spider had a human face on its back. Bunk's screams woke the other inmates from their sleep. Outside Elmer's cell, the warden stood with a look of fear. He watched as the arrogant Bunk was cocooned in spiderweb, paying the price for his brutality. Willis looked at the large hole in the corner, seemingly understanding what had happened. The seventh story, titled Stranger Sings, begins with a doctor who happened to run into an inconvenient female customer in a cafe. Doctor opened the door for her. The sight of the woman before him had Doctor falling for her at first sight. During their conversation, the woman introduced herself as Sarah. Doctor had once endured a failed marriage. Interestingly, Sarah was also single, which piqued Doctor's interest. He ended up chatting with Sarah all the way to her home. Sarah took the initiative and invited him inside, but it would be improper to go to a woman's house on the first meeting. Despite his dullness, Doctor politely declined Sarah's invitation. However, just as he turned to leave, a beautiful song flowed from Sarah's home. Doctor was so captivated by the song that his eyes rolled back. After he came to his senses, he clapped for the singing, never thinking that the beautiful girl could also sing so well. This time, he did not refuse Sarah's invitation. Instead, he was eager to go inside for a drink. Sarah's house was decorated uniquely, with a strong coastal style. An interestingly shaped dagger stood in the hall. Doctor complimented Sarah on her beautiful singing and asked if she had considered a career as a singer. Her expression turned a bit awkward. Distracted, she spilled wine all over herself and said she needed to change her clothes. Doctor was left alone to clean up the mess. After cleaning, he tossed the towel into the laundry basket. His attention was drawn to a blood-stained coat in the full basket. Not just on the coat, there was blood everywhere on the floor. Bracing himself, Doctor pulled back the curtains, only to find a bloody corpse lying in the bathtub. Doctor wanted to get out of there as soon as possible, but there stood Sarah, now dressed in a white dress, blocking his path. He pulled out his phone to call the police, but a dreadlocked woman snatched it away. The woman introduced herself as Miranda, a friend of Sarah's. With a body in the bathtub, the two women stood before him with teasing expressions. Furious, Doctor attempted to run out and call the police, but was stopped by a beautiful song. His eyes rolled back and he lost the power to resist. It turns out it wasn't Sarah who had been singing, but Miranda. Miranda introduced herself as a siren, a creature from ancient Greek mythology that could fly and lured ships with their enchanting songs. Once sailors were mesmerized by their hypnotic singing, the sirens would feast on them. Doctor was confused. If sirens fed on humans, why hadn't they killed him yet? It turns out Sarah and Miranda had set their sights on the doctor for a while. Their encounter wasn't by chance, but a planned kidnapping. Miranda confessed she wanted to die. Doctor was annoyed and asked her to jump off a building, then, rather than involving him. He learned that sirens are immortal, but Miranda despised her identity and wished to become human. To do so, she needed to find a doctor to remove her throat and transplant it into a human body. In this way, a human would replace her. Sarah, who admired Miranda, wished to become a siren herself and have a beautiful singing voice. Miranda once again used her singing to hold Doctor captive. It was a clear warning. If he disobeyed, the corpse in the bathtub would be his fate. Doctor attempted to escape once again. This time, he had completely infuriated Miranda. Revealing her true form as a siren, she warned Doctor if he obediently carried out the surgery, she would consider sparing his shitty life. Otherwise, she threatened to chop him up, starting with his private but smelly part. Left with no choice, Doctor reluctantly proceeded with the operation. He then administered anesthesia to Miranda and removed her throat. The bloody throat was transplanted into Sarah's body. Miranda too received a transplant, Sarah's throat. The surgery was successful. Upon awakening, the first thing Miranda did was hum a tune. Though her voice was discordant, it excited her greatly because she was finally a human. Miranda was deeply grateful to Doctor. Sarah, now with a beautiful, ageless voice of a siren, was equally thrilled. However, from this point on, she had to hunt humans for food. While Sarah used her enchanting voice to bewitch Doctor, she dragged him into her bedroom. In her frenzy, she wanted to devour Doctor to celebrate her transformation, but Miranda quietly approached from behind and delivered a fatal blow to Sarah. It turns out, the dagger from the hall was the weapon capable of killing a siren. Looking at Sarah's disbelieving gaze, Miranda repeatedly stabbed her with the dagger. As Sarah turned into ashes, Doctor was abruptly awakened from hypnosis. Miranda had promised Doctor that if the surgery was successful, she would spare him, and she kept her word. After this ordeal, Doctor found himself thinking that Miranda was not too bad. Miranda was over 500 years older than him, but he didn't mind the age gap. Hence, the two single souls began to live a blissful life together. The eighth story, titled Meter Reader, was set in a future world where a devastating plague spreads the whole planet. Humanity clings to life, echoing with sighs of despair. Every morning, someone drives around, collecting trash from each household. The survivors roll out their garbage cans, but this isn't ordinary garbage. It contains severed human heads, gruesome and blood-streaked. These heads are thrown into an incinerator, transforming into handfuls of dust in the blaze. The gates of hell are opened, and the devil releases the plague. Every infected person becomes a monstrous cannibal, slaughtering loved ones. Only by beheading can they be killed. A few are immune to the plague, bearing the mission of saving humanity. They move through the crumbling cities, and people call them the meter readers. One day, a meter reader named Dalton knocks on a door. He is received by Mrs. Jones, the mistress of the house. Mrs. Jones serves him food, but the sticky substance is far from appetizing. She tells him that her daughter has been infected. The daughter spat at her mother, speaking in an incomprehensible language. Dalton enters the girl's room to find her frail and bound to her bed by her mother. He pulls out a detection device and scans the girl, but the tool shows no reaction. Then he takes out a demon-detecting mirror, which reveals the source of the infection. It turns out it isn't the daughter who's infected, but her mother, Mrs. Jones. The infected turn into man-eating demons. Just then, Mrs. Jones spits in his face, but Dalton swings a scythe at her head, chopping away. The sound of horrific screams fills the air. The scene shifts to the other side of the city where Dalton's wife and son reside. Nearby, their young daughter, Teresa, is part of the family of 3 who are waiting patiently for the safe return of Dalton. Teresa is listening to the radio, broadcasting non-stop updates on the pandemic. The human world has become fragmented, yet her mother and brother maintain an optimistic facade. Her mother is even anticipating the reopening of the beauty salon so she can get her nails done. They haven't had contact with their father for 3 days now. As per the rules, if more than 72 hours pass without contact, they must undergo re-quarantine. This implies that their father could have potentially been infected. As the night deepens, Dalton finally arrives late. Teresa's mother and brother are eager to welcome him, but Teresa stops them. She even pulls out a cleaver, threatening her mother that she'll decapitate their father if she opens the door. Her little brother curses at Teresa, but their mother has no choice but to tell her husband to sleep in the cellar for the night, and they'll let him in after he has been tested in the morning. So Dalton walks alone into the cellar. Teresa keeps watch over the security monitors outside. She recalls when the first wave of the pandemic hit and how it failed to gain the government's attention. Many even thought the plague was a scam. As a result of the government's negligence and her family's complacency, her youngest sister unfortunately became infected with the plague. Left with no choice, their father had to behead his infected daughter. In the face of the ravaging pandemic, the government crafted devices that could identify the infected, but only a few could have access to these devices. Dalton was one of those meter readers who wielded such a device. Bearing this mission, he had to say goodbye to his wife and children each day, traveling through the plague-ridden city, testing and treating people. He once told Teresa to trust no one, not even him, because demons are the best deceivers. Teresa had a nightmare where her father appeared demonic, devouring her mother and brother, his mouth wide open to welcome any smelly turds. He kept reminding her in his dream to trust no one. Awoken from a nightmare, Teresa gripped the knife in her hand. She patrolled the house, where she found her mother cooking in the kitchen. She thought about her father, surely famished by now. Her mother wanted to take food to him in the cellar, but Teresa adamantly disagreed. As they argued, the mischievous brother had managed to slip past both of them, sneaking off to the cellar. They hurried after him, but it was too late. The troublesome boy had locked the door behind him. Knowing their father may already be infected, Teresa was ready to kill her father to save her brother. The helpless mother had no choice but to knock Teresa unconscious. After some time, Teresa awoke with her father's cautionary words ringing in her ears. Remember, the devil is the best liar. Teresa didn't forget her mission. Wielding the weapon, she made her way to the cellar, a place filled with dreadful moaning echoing through the darkness. Upon entering, she found her brother wearing a mask. She asked where their parents were. He pointed behind her, and Teresa followed his direction. She found her father, barely hanging on to life, clutching a wound. His last mission had exacted a heavy toll on him. He had immunity against the plague, yet he had also brought the virus home. Their playful brother was infected due to contact with their father, and their mother too contracted the infection trying to save the boy. The boy, turned demon, was quite nimble, disappearing quickly into the darkness. Teresa had only taken a few steps in pursuit when she encountered her mother. It was apparent that her mother was more fearsome than her brother, advancing towards Teresa with a chilling laugh. Trapped between her terrifying mother in front and her eerie brother behind, Teresa had nowhere to run. Dodging, she caused her mother's elongated fingernails to impale the brother's body. Her mother shrieked, oblivious that Teresa had maneuvered behind her. Swiftly, she beheaded her mother with a slash of her blade. In the dark space, only the sound of dripping blood resonated as a stark reality. Her father, with his fading breaths, praised Teresa's bravery and decisiveness. Before breathing his last, he passed to her the emblem of the meter reader, a symbol of her coming of age. From that moment on, Teresa would carry on her father's will. The sun rises slowly. It's time again to take out the garbage. The heads of Teresa's mother and brother turn to ashes in the flames. Teresa abandons all her worries as the television broadcast announces humanity's encounter with a catastrophic disaster. At this moment, debating the origin of the plague is utterly meaningless. There's no disputing that tracing and controlling the epidemic is humanity's top priority. Teresa takes up the gear her father once wore. At this moment, humanity needs them. The 9th story, titled Time Out, begins with a mysterious wardrobe. A boy managed to find the key and, out of curiosity, opened it. His kitten, equally as curious, sauntered in. His grandmother observed this and immediately grabbed the boy and shut the wardrobe door in a panic. She explained to the boy that this wardrobe was a family heirloom, a treasure that should only be opened when he came of age. Otherwise, something terrible might occur. After sending the annoying boy away, the grandmother cautiously reopened the wardrobe. The once lively kitten had now transformed into a pile of dust. The boy's name was Tim, and this wardrobe was a legacy left to him by his grandfather. Fast forward 10 years, the once naughty boy had matured into a handsome young man. Tim was now a university student. His roommate was his constant companion. Despite spending double the time studying compared to his roommate, Tim's exam results were always far from comparable. The gap in natural talent wasn't something that could be bridged merely by hard work. One day, while Tim was engrossed in his studies, he received a package from his grandmother. It was the familiar wardrobe, his family's legacy. Tucked inside the parcel was also the key to the wardrobe. In a letter accompanying the package, his grandmother told Tim of the magical powers of the wardrobe. If ever short on time, he could venture into the wardrobe to steal some. However, she warned him to always remember to bring the key and not to be too greedy, as borrowed time always came with a cost. Tim remained diligent in his studies, while his roommate was more interested in romancing girls. One day, the roommate invited a girl Tim had been secretly admiring, along with several others, for a party in their dorm. Tim took the opportunity to get closer to his crush. Studying law, Tim shared with her his father's unfulfilled dream of becoming a lawyer, which was tragically cut short due to a deadly accident when Tim was very young. Tim aspired to continue his father's dream. The girl admired Tim's dedication, but becoming a lawyer wasn't an easy feat. Having indulged in the party and drank too much the previous night, Tim had forgotten to review for his exam, which was merely half an hour away. He was at his wit's end when he remembered his grandmother's words about the wardrobe and the possibility of stealing time. Gathering his courage, Tim picked up the key and opened the wardrobe. There was nothing particularly notable in the wardrobe, save for an old desk. Strangely, from the moment he stepped into the wardrobe, the watch in his hand began to spin rapidly. When Tim emerged, he found that the clock on the desk no longer had numbers. It turned out that as long as he entered the wardrobe, time outside would slow down considerably. Excited, Tim picked up his study materials and entered the wardrobe. Half an hour later, he rushed to the exam hall. In just half an hour, a beard had grown on his face, which seemed very peculiar to his roommate. Thanks to his thorough revision, Tim passed the school exam. From then on, it seemed like Tim was on a roll. At a young age, he bought a house and even purchased an enormous engagement diamond ring for the girl he fancied. However, he appeared much older. His roommate warned Tim not to overwork himself, given that he had to decorate the house, prepare for his wedding, and tackle the bar exam in a few months. But Tim knew, as long as he had that wardrobe, he would have plenty of time to squander. Soon, Tim secured a job at a law firm with outstanding results. Even his superiors marveled at his time management skills. However, this job was not for the average person. Tim, who was fairly average himself, had to spend twice as much time as his colleagues to complete his work. Plus, he wanted to spend time with his beloved wife after work every day. After work, he would step into the wardrobe and finish his tasks. Even though Tim would spend hours in the wardrobe, in the outside world, it was merely the blink of an eye. Leveraging this wardrobe, Tim soon surpassed his excellent colleagues and became the youngest senior lawyer in the firm. But Tim has already grown white hair, his eyes are beginning to blur. Clearly, his body is seriously incongruent with his actual age. Before long, Tim became a father. To allow his wife to sleep a little more, Tim would valiantly take care of the child every night. Between working, accompanying his wife, and taking care of his child, time was becoming increasingly scarce. As a result, he was going in and out of the wardrobe more and more often. Fast forward 5 years, Tim is playing with his child. Gradually, his legs are not obeying him. Even the smallest action leaves him panting. An onslaught of tedious work follows. Because he can steal time, he's always able to find a balance between family and work. But one day, he collapsed at his celebratory feast. The doctor said Tim had a mild stroke, which Tim couldn't believe. He ate healthily and exercised regularly. Tim was not even 40 yet. Obviously, the word stroke seemed far away from him. The doctor advised Tim to take a break from work, to stop working so hard. His wife knew Tim wanted to be a good father, to make up for the loss of his own father who died young. But repeatedly overtaxing his body would only push him into an early grave. Under his wife's persuasion, Tim sealed away the key to his wardrobe. He intended to set aside work and solely focus on his family. And so Tim lived peacefully for 3 years. However, Tim's abilities were mediocre. He was not suited for the job. His boss, the former roommate, regretfully told him that due to his professional failures, Tim missed the opportunity to become a senior partner. His wife comforted Tim, saying that she and their son didn't care whether he could reach the pinnacle of success. To them, Tim's companionship was the most important thing. Tim agreed verbally, but while his wife was sound asleep, he quietly went to the basement. As his work was hanging by a thread, he would lose everything he'd worked so hard for if things continued this way. Feeling helpless, he could only take out the key and reopen the wardrobe that had been sealed for 3 years. He carefully put the key in his pocket, not realizing that his movements had awakened his young son. Tim reassured his son, telling him he would be back in just a moment. Just like he did 3 years ago, he still busied himself with work in the closet. The hands on his watch spun at a breakneck speed, while his wife's words continued to echo in his mind. They didn't care for more money. All they cared about was having Tim around. His grandmother had also warned him not to be greedy. Tampering too much with time would only bring about a harsh retribution. Thinking this, Tim began to pack up, planning to step out for a while. Unexpectedly, a big hole in his pocket had caused his keys to slip out. Tim panicked. He continuously banged on the closet door, pleading for help to his son outside. His face gradually withered amidst his screams, and Tim's calls for help grew weaker and weaker. At the same time, his son outside found the keys. Out of curiosity, he opened the closet, only to find his father had turned into a handful of dust. The son dropped the keys and attempted to find traces of his father. Finally, he entered the closet and shut the door behind him. The 10th story, titled The Things in Oakwoods Past, begins at a town named Oakwood, which has a long history, filled with tales. Legend has it that in 1821, 200 years ago, the entire town vanished into thin air, leaving no trace of its residents. To this day, their disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. Some speculate it was the work of a rampant disease, while others believe it was due to an attack by the indigenous people. The more outrageous theories even propose an extraterrestrial abduction, suggesting that the residents were taken into space for research. Marnie, the mayor's daughter and the town's librarian, discovered a few diaries in a stack of historical books. According to these diaries, digging 3 feet deep into the city park would reveal a massive time capsule. The capsule is adorned with strange totems, marked with the exact date from 200 years ago, when the townspeople collectively vanished. Based on these findings, the town will hold a grand ceremony to open this capsule this coming Friday. Perhaps this might unveil the truth behind their sudden disappearance. When Marnie opened the photos in the diaries, one eerie image of a tree gave her chills. According to the diary, a similar mysterious disappearance of the town occurred 400 years ago, around 1621. It seems that the town's residents vanish every 200 years. Now, it's 2021. Marnie grew scared. If the pattern holds true, they too might disappear this year. She couldn't wait until Friday. She wanted to unlock the box right now. She then found the key to the capsule. Both the box and the key bore symbols of the indigenous people. Marnie inserted the key. All the totems came together, forming a fearsome ghost face. Just as she attempted to unlock the box, a sudden alarm bell rang. Marnie had to abandon her plan and return to the library, delving back into those diaries. The diary's author wrote in the conclusion, every 200 years, a terrifying creature would emerge deep from the jungle. It slaughtered the townspeople, turning the whole town into a sea of blood. The only thing capable of defeating this monster was hidden in that enormous box. However, no one believed Marnie's theory. The mayor also refused to unlock the box prematurely based on the fragmented clues in the diary. Marnie spent all her days and nights in the library. She finally made it to Friday when a sudden chill swept over her. Marnie discovered a shocking message in the diary predicting that today was the day to open the time capsule. At the same time, the townsfolk were gathering, ready to witness this grand moment. Everyone was curious about what their ancestors had left them. However, Marnie suddenly rushed into the crowd. It turns out she had deciphered the diary. The author had children in this town, but her daughter was murdered by the townsfolk in 1821. In retaliation, she unearthed the buried time capsule. This box didn't contain the town's savior, but a curse that had been buried for 200 years. The author fooled the townsfolk with her diary and opened this capsule 200 years ago, causing everyone to vanish overnight. But her diary survived and was discovered by Marnie today. Apparently, it had successfully manipulated Marnie into letting the townsfolk dig up this box. If the box was opened, history would repeat itself. But it was already too late. The mayor had broken open the large lock on the box. This wasn't a time capsule, but rather a gateway to hell. The demons of hell were stirring. They began to crawl out of the box, feasting on the onlooking townsfolk. The whole town turned into a sea of blood. Only Marnie managed to escape, tossed into a police car headed for the town border. In her flight, however, she suffered a car accident. The crash flung her from the vehicle. Marnie opened her eyes, bloodied and bruised, to find a demon coldly staring at her. Terrified and injured, she was incapable of escaping. As she prepared herself for death, she realized that she had reached the town's border. There was a thick barrier that the monsters couldn't penetrate. The town's inhabitants had been slaughtered in one night. After the carnage, the creatures returned to the capsule. The capsule closed. The lock's timer rapidly spun to the day it was last opened. Accompanied by the roaring of the demons, it sank back into the ground. The curse continued. The next time it would be opened was in 200 years. The 11th story, titled Drug Traffic, begins with a girl named Mai, who was plagued by a strange illness. Only one drug can control her condition, but it's prohibitively expensive. To afford the life-saving drug, her mother can only take her across borders to Canada. This attracts the attention of a congressman named Evan. He gives speeches on television all day, focusing on healthcare and promising that if he becomes president, he'll ensure that everyone can afford medicine. To prove how bad the current healthcare system is, he brings a film crew to document this poor mother and daughter. They arrive at the checkpoint, the border between Canada and the United States. The checkpoint officer, Bo, can't help but grumble at the sight of Evan, saying that these politicians are always putting on a show. Mai is ravenous, her eyes fixated on a tender-looking boy nearby. Her mother hastily gives her medicine. Evan finishes his impassioned speech and leads the group of cross-border medication purchasers into the checkpoint. Bo can't help but notice the pallid Mai amidst the crowd. As the last line of defense, Bo's duty is to prevent any contraband or dangerous individuals from crossing the border. However, in Evan's eyes, this has become racial discrimination. He hopes that Bo will show leniency, seeing that they are all patients. Throughout the conversation, Mai's stomach was rumbling. Bo called a halt to the ceaseless administering of medicine by Mai's mother, demanding to inspect the mother's bag. Amid the dispute, Mai suddenly vomited violently. Bo opened the mother's bag, packed with newly bought prescription drugs. Without a prescription, carrying such a large quantity of drugs across the border is illegal. Moreover, the labels on the medicine were in a language they couldn't understand, with the ingredients listed in an obscure manner. This scene greatly excited Evan. He instructed the photographer to seize the moment, planning to weave it into a story about racial discrimination upon returning home. He believed this would surely earn him more votes. Bo forcibly separated the mother-daughter duo. The daughter waited alongside politicians and other entrants. Deprived of her medication, Mai was famished. She opened her mouth wide in front of Evan's wife, but luckily Evan noticed in time and ejected Mai from the room. She rummaged desperately through boxes and cupboards, searching for something to eat. Eventually, without her medication, Mai collapsed. The others remained oblivious to Mai's episode. They were in the drawing room, some playing with their phones, others with toys. A young boy, upon hearing a call, left the room out of curiosity. Meanwhile, Bo has taken the mother aside into a room for a private conversation. In reality, Bo understands the mother's plight. She's willing to do anything to save her daughter. However, his duty is to prevent contraband from entering the country. It's unfortunate that their healthcare system doesn't allow them to buy more affordable medications at home. The mother is extremely anxious, and all she wants now is to be by her daughter's side. She fears a terrible incident might occur if Mai doesn't take her medicine on time. Elsewhere, following the cries for help, the little boy arrives at the place where Mai has fallen, only to see a decapitated corpse lying before him. The boy is terrified. He suddenly looks up to see Mai's head rising with her long spine and bloody entrails dragging below. Mai has already consumed the little boy, but one person is apparently not enough to satiate her hunger. Therefore, she sets her sights on the other people in the reception room. Evan continues arguing with Bo. He accuses Bo of being racist and abusing power, while Bo considers Evan a sanctimonious fool who knows nothing but talks nonsense. The mother was nervous and desperate, frantically banging on the glass, pleading for them to let her out. Bo can only handcuff the emotionally unstable mother to the table. To prove his point, Evan presents the prescribed medication that the mother has brought along. He asks her to read the Chinese text on the medicine box, but the mother admits that she can't read it. It turns out the mother and daughter are of Asian descent, not Chinese, and naturally they can't understand Chinese. Meanwhile, Mai staggered past, dragging her entrails, sending a chill down everyone's spine. In her panic, the mother pulled out Bo's handgun, threatening two people to let her go. Outside, Mai had turned bloodthirsty, having slaughtered everyone, feasting on their bodies. Given the circumstances, Bo was even more determined not to let the mother and daughter go. He couldn't allow this monster to cross the border. Bo left the mother in the room while he picked up an axe and handed it to Evan. The entire police station was filled with pools of blood and bodies. Even Evan's wife was not spared. Evan finally understood how foolish he had been. Mai hid behind the couch, her face partly visible in the shadows. She opened her blood-soaked mouth, letting out a roar at the two men. Agile as a cat, Mai managed to dodge Bo's bullets. The mother, armed with the gun, forced Bo to bring over her daughter's body. She blamed Bo for delaying her daughter's medication, leading to her sickness worsening. They had no choice but to devise a plan to find Mai's body. Mai reached her mother, but Evan furiously attacked her body. Even so, Mai still wanted to stay by her mother's side. The mother's pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. Bo took the axe, striking the body repeatedly until the monstrous Mai was dismembered. Bo discarded his axe and began to discuss politics with Evan. Bo believed that if Mai could have legal access to medication, her condition might be well controlled. Evan also admitted that the so-called health insurance reform was nothing more than a show put on by politicians for election purposes. Even if he were elected, members of Congress would not agree to set price caps on prescription drugs, and the poor would still be unable to afford life-saving medication. Ironically, he initially became a politician for the sake of good health insurance. But the so-called racial benefits, health insurance reforms, and other policies were all just acts arranged by the PR team. The mother watched her daughter die beside her and broke the glass above her head. As the glass fell, the mother's head rolled next to her daughter's body. Mai suddenly understood, using the last of her strength to fly to her mother's body. Mai was reborn. She bit off her restrained right hand and stumbled onto the outbound vehicle. In the end, she still crossed the border and returned to the United States. The 12th story, titled A Dead Girl Named Sue, begins in the police station of 1968, where the sheriff was loading ammunition. An emergency broadcast was playing on the television, showing that a virus outbreak erupted in the city, causing the dead to come back to life and start rampant killing. To ensure safety, the police urged the citizens to stay at home, locking doors and windows, and avoid going out unnecessarily. This town was quite remote, and the locals, armed to the teeth, surrounded the entire police station one day. It turns out there was a problematic young man named Cliven in the town who was infamous for his wicked deeds, including tormenting and killing girls. A little girl named Sue had fallen victim to this brute. However, as Cliven was the mayor's son and there was insufficient evidence against him, the sheriff felt helpless. The townsfolk could only push the sheriff to champion their cause. Laws and justice seemed insignificant in the face of power and money. Fearing reprisal from the townsfolk, Cliven had gone into hiding. But due to his duty, the sheriff had no choice but to go out and search for Cliven. He had to ensure Cliven's safety. He discovered the horrifying sight of an old lady's body found in a local resident's home. The elderly lady was covered in bite marks, her death an utter tragedy. Surprisingly, Cliven was hiding here. Armed with a shotgun, Cliven denied having murdered the old lady and harming the girl, Sue. He called the sheriff a mere gatekeeper, insinuating that even if he were arrested, he'd walk free by morning because he's the mayor's son. The zombie virus had already spread throughout the town. The terrifying undead roamed the streets, and the sheriff noted the iron chains inside the house stained with blood. Even the bed sheets were drenched in fresh blood. A fallen blue flower added a chilling contrast to the scene. Facing Cliven's smug face, the sheriff's rage skyrocketed. He arrested Cliven for the brutal murder of Sue and the pitiful old lady. Driving the mayor-sponsored patrol car, the sheriff escorted Cliven back to the station. Aware that Cliven would likely be released even if brought to trial, the sheriff risked losing his job. He rallied the townspeople, who were only too eager to bring Sue's body. Cliven cursed the sheriff, accusing him of murdering Sue and colluding with all the witnesses and the medical examiner to prevent them from testifying. The news on TV reported that the zombie virus was spreading. The undead rose from the morgue, relentlessly attacking and eating people. Cliven awoke in his cell to find the townsfolk lined up outside, coldly staring at him. They were the relatives of Sue and the old lady. Even as death loomed, Cliven still refused to admit his wrongdoings. This was his last chance, yet he was unrepentant before the grieving relatives of his victims. The body of Sue had been bagged and carried into the prison due to the viral outbreak. Sue had turned into a zombie. The sheriff admitted his fear of zombies, yet he argued that Cliven, a man persistently evil and unrepentant, was far more terrifying. He then pulled out a blue hairpin, once belonging to Sue. It's revealed that the little girl had been cruelly imprisoned and tortured by Cliven in a secret chamber, and her death had been unspeakably tragic. As a law enforcer, it was agonizing to watch Cliven evade punishment. Neither the sheriff nor the townsfolk could do anything about it. Overwhelmed by intense hunger, the little girl began to devour Cliven's flesh, bite by bite. On the TV, the mayor's interview was being broadcast. He was advising citizens to smash the zombies' heads or set them ablaze. The world had descended into utter chaos. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.